There's different ways to look at the data set, and one of the ways to break it apart is to think about the relationship between whether or not people applied for a permit and how they answered other questions, to see if there's any relationships between, non-compliant growers are answering things in a different way than compliant growers, et cetera. So for the presentation, the slides I'm going to go through now, that's how we're breaking that apart primarily. At the end, I'll show you how we're breaking, or what comes out when we break it apart based on farm size. And we're still in the process of running other sorts of analyses on that data set. We closed data collection a couple weeks ago, so this is kind of the first take. We're very open to thoughts and whether or not what we're seeing here kind of matches with what you've seen and the dynamics you've seen in the world you're in. Respondents indicated outdoor cultivation was the most common production method across all permit types. Farmers also reported similar environmental practices across all permit types. So none of these show statistically significant differences. Folks who were permitted, pending, and who had not applied all indicated that they were farming organic, biodynamic, composted, closed loop. And of course, this is a survey. People selected to respond to certain ways, but it raises questions about the relationships between permitting goals and what's happening on the ground. Farmers across all permit statuses also indicated that they planted away from streams, certainly an issue in the North Coast region. We start to see differences in permit statuses when we look at farm size. The majority of those who did not apply for permits produced less than 100 pounds in 2018. And the idea that smaller farms or that larger farms are the farms that are becoming permitted is complemented by analyses of satellite images and permit addresses. So we look at images on Google Earth and map that against where people have applied for permits. We also find that permitted farms are the larger farms. So you can see here that when we look at greenhouses on Google Earth, this is some advanced work, you can see that the average size, the mean greenhouse size for a non-permitted farm is around a little less than 4,000 square feet, whereas for a permitted farm, it's 1,100 plus square feet. The percentage of farms that are representing smaller greenhouses is much larger than the number of farms representing the permitted greenhouses. So we're seeing that there's quite a few small farmers who are not permitted, and yet the total area of the larger farms is starting to potentially encroach on these, or to start to match up with the size of the areas as these smaller farms are also taking. Similarly for outdoor grows, the non-permitted farms, the ones that have not applied, smaller outdoor grow sites, mean outdoor size, than those who have applied. The number, this is from data in Humboldt County, I believe. Again, looking at Google Earth against permit addresses. So the thing about the survey data is one of the ways to analyze the survey data is by looking at these other data sets to see, does this seem to be a similar pattern in what we're seeing from other sorts of data. We can also, and what we're starting to do is analyze the survey data within itself to look for these trends within the ways people can answer certain questions and how they respond. So some of the trends back to the survey data that we're seeing is that older farmers were less likely to apply for permits. Over 35% who did not apply for permits were between the ages of 60 and 69. So in the graphs that follow, we're going to see the red is indicating those who didn't apply. So for folks that took the survey, the most number of respondents were between the ages of 60 and 69. We also found that farmers who did not apply for permits spent less on production. So spent $5,000 or less on regulatory costs. We also found though that over 60% who who did apply, so that's the blue or the green, spent over $5,000 on production costs in 2018. So again, the idea that bigger, more invested farms are becoming compliant. We found, and this is something we presented this data to the state last week. We were in Sacramento and presented to the governor's office, and Fish and Game were there, and a couple other agencies. And one of the findings I think is significant is the responses from people indicating that they were spending more on compliance costs than on permits and fees. So compliance costs would be things like culverts or like stream alteration agreements or water storage facilities. The costs to come into compliance might be more expensive than actually the permits and fees for growing, which is significant when you think about what the goals of those initiatives are, right? So if the goal of getting a culvert up to code and getting your, the cement under your water tank, permitted, if the goals are water quality concerns or floodplain concerns, those are public goods, right? Those are public goals, and under that logic, potentially, that could be rationale for thinking about forms of subsidies, that we might want to provide because these are public goods that we're trying to accomplish. And this is a regulatory avenue to do that, and a potentially exciting opportunity to do that in an area that historically hasn't been regulated in that way. But one of the challenges with engaging environmental or using farmers and using agricultural producers as the point of intervention for environmental compliance is that burden of reporting practices and paying for those fees all comes down to the farmer. So the payments are one thing, but the reporting, as I'm sure folks have experienced, the reporting of those practices, for an outdoor grow is different than what you'd have. So something we were talking about the other night. This is different than what you would have if you were an indoor farmer and the electricity you were using was having an environmental impact. And in that case, you might get taxed additionally, or you might have to pay more for your electric bill, but you wouldn't necessarily be filing more paperwork or engaging with the regulator yourself. So thinking again about the challenges with regulating agriculture for environmental outcomes and ways that we can support farmers to go through that process, I think are important conversations, or potentially fruitful conversations to be had going forward.
This difference between the compliance costs versus the permits and fees is that built into the permits and fees is this was hard fought for by folks here, was some gradation of accounting for costs and for size of farmers, for like giving lower cost permits for people that were smaller or doing less production. But if you have uniform or like really high compliance costs, then really it kind of defeats the purpose of like a lower cost for permits and fees, because the compliance costs are so heavy that everyone across the board has to pay for those kinds of compliance costs regardless of size. So we might think about some kinds of programs that actually begin to address size and production size in the same way that permits and fees also address that.
So I've got a couple quotes up here, and these are stories perhaps you've heard as well. So this is from a grower who'd been growing for 11 to 15 years in Mendocino and produced between 150 to 1,000 pounds last year and has not applied for a permit. This person says, we have a large range that's over 1,000 acres with 80 acres of vineyard and 50,000 square feet of cultivation space. The LSA we had to submit required our consultants to review the entire property for violations. Our final costs to remediate culverts that have nothing to do with cannabis cultivation are upwards of 50,000, possibly 100,000. These culverts have been in place for over 40 years. Currently, they want us to do a dam stability analysis. We have had 2 consultants up. No one wants to take on the project because the dam has been intact for 40 years, so it's fine, and we're not using it for cultivation. We're still in the process, and we'll resolve these issues, but these issues seem to be ancillary to the actual cannabis operation we're running, and our bureaucratic and financial burden. So, yeah, another issue, and not so much here, but the state more broadly is local zoning, right? So over 40% of those who did not apply for permits are not zoned for cannabis. We have a grower responding to the survey, commented 2018. We're growing in an RR10 zoning, so you cannot grow commercial legally indoor or outdoor. We're surrounded by ag exclusive zoning with few or no near neighbors. Neighboring and surrounding properties are 8 to 350 acres, but zoning precludes possibilities. So yeah, local zoning is certainly and support for local jurisdictions to think through what creating a cannabis an area for cannabis cultivation might look like. I think is an important step going forward, especially in counties where the elected officials might receive pushback from voters due to stigma and historical ideas of who cannabis growers are. We also found that 1/3 of farmers who did not apply received over 50% of their income from cannabis. So, what's at stake with non-compliance? Potentially rural livelihoods, rural communities. But in Mendocino County was talking about the abatement policies and commenting that people who are barely getting by have to sell their land or find another way to support their remote living, which is impossible. Plenty of families are unable to provide enough food. They're not able to keep clothing on their children. As a mother, it's hard to see so many kids hungry, wearing the same clothes day after day, and hoping to find anything in their store because the car registration is expired. We're suffering in the hills. The government is starving our community, and people are desperate and dangerous. I had that quote when presented to the state. Yeah, it's a particular concern, and I think this is worth documenting.
And one other way of framing that is that 1/3 gain over 50% of their income from cannabis, but also 2/3 do gain under 50% of their income from it, which means also that this is an important part of household income, that people maybe aren't going the biggest they can go, but as far as people that use it to supplement incomes, which is really important in rural livelihoods, this is also another way of looking at that.
Right. They're not slowly, everyone's just growing. When we asked why people were having trouble entering the legal market, limited legal market options pose a barrier to compliance. We also found that unclear information posed a barrier to compliance. People across the board who applied and did not apply had trouble navigating the regulatory system.
I think this is one of our most consistent results, is that across the board in all groups that lack of clarity is one of the major issues.
Yeah, this person commented on Humboldt County growing 11 to 15 years, changing the rules mid-game, was faced with the decision to install a tank for forbearance or put in an agricultural well. After 20 grams of this deep hydrologically disconnected well, I was told that the rules have changed and now they can't deem a well hydrologically disconnected. I'm now faced with spending another $30,000 plus on water tanks. We also found, this is of interest to the state, regulatory officials, those who did not apply received significantly less outreach than those who did apply. Overall, people received very little enforcement. So again, the idea that people, I guess, are choosing to actively resist, it's not necessarily that seems to be the way at least the survey respondents are characterizing their involvement in the process. It's not a total resistance as much as it may be, not engaging with the state. This person talks about enforcement. Grower califeras are not as banned zero inspections. They're kind of the regulatory confusion, the lack of outreach sort of. Why people did not apply, so asking those who did not apply why not. Cost was the biggest barrier. People weren't seeing unregulated market opportunities and county incentives. People felt there was few county incentives. We also looked at the written-in responses and looked for themes that had come up in those written-in responses. Again, cost and compliance was the major theme that came up. It's too expensive. The expense without a guarantee, the way fees are up at the front of the years, at the end of the years, and then growing for 24 to 36 years. Banking and no access to reasonable loans has impeded our ability to apply and keep the farm profitable while trying to also understand and comply with all the regulations and conditions of compliance. Our local building and planning department decided no building or grading permits would be issued before the actual cannabis permit was issued. Due to restrictions from the water board, we had to scale cultivation back to 15% of the allotted square footage. If our pond permit had been issued after it was applied for and approved in 2016, our farm would have stayed profitable because we would have been able to cultivate at scale for the past 3 years. So the timing issue, I think, that this was brought up, right, is significant if you're not able to cultivate during the years when you don't have a permit yet. So that's, I think, potentially a regulatory space to think through. Again, why folks didn't apply, those who did not apply did not necessarily fear arrests, fines, or feel community pressure to apply. Non-compliant farmers also believe that their practices were better for the environment than that regulated by government, right? So that kind of maybe potentially, again, speaks to this idea that farmers who are not applying are still reporting environmentally friendly practices, and they're not necessarily convinced that coming into compliance is going to pose better environmental outcomes, right? So it's not necessarily an anti-environmental sentiment that we're seeing here, as much as again the cost. Those that did apply saw that they weren't sold that legal markets were going to be, that wasn't necessarily the reason why they applied. They also did not think the cost was reasonable. For those that did apply, so this is the person talking about, we were licensed in 2016 and 17, but dropped out in 2018. We had no problems getting our property compliant or getting licensure. However, our property is small, it's also our home. We had hoped we could farm 10,000 square feet to make a living for our family, but it became clear that was not going to be the case. With the onerous and excessive regulations, no other ag crop is expected to comply with. We saw pretty quickly we could work 16 hours a day, but every corner and still not make ends meet. We decided it wasn't worth to continue seeking full licensure. This is Trinity County growing 16 to 23 years. Produced 2,500 to 5,000 pounds last year. It's a decent amount. 10,000. For those that applied, costs, regulatory delays, and unclear information pose barriers to licensure. I've watched friends who are small farmers doing ethical and organic farming get shafted by county and state regs. They're so confusing and convoluted and expensive. My friends are struggling to stay above water. They cannot afford consultants. In the meantime, we watch outsiders come in, buy large pieces of land, store branches, cut up the trees, stretch the properties, put in massive greenhouses, not steward the land as we do, and they are easily permitted. Just Trinity County. CDFA and CDFW are very hard to communicate with. We get responses more than 6 months after we submit something, following up with them, not accelerate the process. It would be ideal to have a project manager assigned to a project. The county of Mendocino has had a lot of turnover and does not have a good file storage system. Each time there's turnover, they lost their documents. We'd love to help each of these agencies perform well and look forward to working with them. That's a memo. For those that apply, the fear of arrest, security for their family, and the belief in the future value of the permit influenced compliance. And for those who applied, personal time, consultants, community members, and regulators all helped. So yeah, the idea is that people had the ability to spend the time doing this. As when we're looking at the written in responses and what needs came up. The ability to have that time is really important. My county planning department has been helpful and reasonable. Hiring a consultant has been very helpful but expensive. This is Humboldt County growing for 37 plus years. This is a different take on the relationship with the regulatory system. For those that apply, government websites and other businesses were important sources of information. And overall, farmers describe their experience with the regulatory process is influenced by cost, farm size, and inequities with other systems. This is looking at themes that came up when we asked kind of open-ended questions. Again, the idea that cost is really, overwhelming was the main theme that came up, along with the idea that, I'm a small grower, a heritage grower, I've been around forever, and the cost is burdensome. Everything's way too expensive. The agencies are not communicating with each other to see what one charges for permits. If they realize how much everything costs for small farms, they'd probably charge less. Also, to upgrade LSA with CDFW, they need to make it less expensive. No one has large amounts of money to fix problems on their land that were a direct result of the logging industry. which has far greater impacts to our environment than a small plant, cannabis plant, growing in which sunshine could ever have. So again, I mentioned that we've kind of broken this analysis up as well by small versus large farms. So I have 2 slides here showing some of the preliminary results from that, just kind of outlining them by bullet point. We found that smaller farmers, when we break up, again, looking at results within the survey, how people respond to answers based on how much they produce. And here we were categorizing small as producing 250 pounds or less last year. Smaller farmers were commonly closer to Class 1 strains and were not zoned for cannabis at higher rates. Smaller farmers depended more on neighbors, on business partners and trade associations, while larger farmers depended more on government websites and consultants. Women were more represented among smaller farmers. Fear of cascading inspections and requirements was greater among smaller farmers. Larger growers were more likely to have not had delays in permitting. Larger farmers also experienced more enforcement from the Water Board, County Ag, and the BCC, Bureau of Cannabis Cultivation. Larger growers were more likely to experience community pressure to comply. Unpermitted larger growers were also more likely than unpermitted smaller growers to feel that the unregulated economy had more economic opportunity, would provide better for workers and family, and would give them more control over their farm decisions. So unpermitted, illicit growers are thinking that they've got more opportunity in the unregulated market than smaller growers do. The environmental practices were similar across small and large, except smaller farmers use biodynamic and recycling strategies. So what does this mean? Implications and next steps, and again, love your feedback on some of this stuff. Reducing compliance costs, rezoning, interagency coordination, and innovative forms of outreach may help improve compliance. We found that cost, limited market options, and a lack of clear information pose barriers to compliance. Farmers who did not comply were smaller and experienced less outreach. Few farmers felt pressure from their neighbors to comply. What's at stake with non-compliance? Well, non-compliant farms still supported farmers' incomes. The environmental benefits of legalization remain unclear, right? So I'm thinking about, if compliance costs are a reason why it's so hard to get folks on board, and we see environmental benefits from, having your culvert licensed, but having a small farm is not necessarily what the environmental threat is. Perhaps we need to be thinking about those as separate projects and separate initiatives. But yeah, again, things to think about going forward. Just to, add a different perspective on the process. A grower from Mono County, grown between 16 to 23 years, he's very excited about this legal transition. It's been difficult and time-consuming to get permits in place, but nothing worthwhile is easy. Very grateful for the opportunity.
There's 2 permitted grows, I think, in that.
Here's one of them.